Okay. How are we doing?
Everyone's frozen.
Yep, you can go ahead.
Okay, thank you. Good morning, everybody, and welcome to our second lockdown, well, it's a sort of a semi-lockdown meeting. It's certainly a coronavirus-aware meeting of this year. I'm chairing the meeting on a string, a very fine string, because I'm working from my iPhone because of connectivity problems. And so I need to say two things before anything else. The first is I do have a full battery, but this is quite consuming. If I do pack up, Mike Stannard is in the room. He's the vice chair and he will carry on. So that just bear that in mind. So welcome to this meeting. We've got two main items on the agenda, plus minute approval. Before I move to look at the minutes, I'd just like to remind everybody that like at the first meeting and the second meeting that we held, if you want a particular item to be discussed by this panel, please let me know. Email me, and then I will have a discussion with the relevant officer with Democratic Services, and it won't be dealt with right away. I'm sure we can't talk about everything at once, but it will be dealt with at a future SEEP. So please, if you have items, please bring them forward. I must say I've not received any up to now, but if you want something, and I'm sure you are, because this is a panel, it's a cross-party panel, then please get back to me. Okay, so I'd like to start this meeting with consideration of the minutes of the last meeting on the 1st of July.
Chair, we've had apologies from Councillor Giles, and members need to declare it of interest, please. Thank you.
Right, thank you very much, Jackie. See, Jackie is in charge. Yeah, so is Adam Giles anyone to attend? Because I'm working from my phone, I can't see everybody.
Yeah, the members present are Councillor Lubbock, Councillor Stannard, Councillor Osborne, Councillor Carlo, and Councillor McCartney-Gray has disappeared again. Is that right? Yeah.
Right.
Okay. And once the meeting started, I do find it very difficult to check emails and things. So if people are trying to contact me that way, it's difficult.
Yeah.
Councillor McCartney-Gray I think she's dipping in and out today, for what I can make out.
Okay. So thank you for that. And also, declarations of interest then. Has anybody got an interest to declare? No. Jolly good. So minutes. Thanks, Jackie. I'll just go through them page by page. If you have a comment, then please do. So we're looking at the accuracy of minutes. Page 1, which is page 3 of the bundle. Page 2, which is page 4 of the bundle. Page 3, which is page 5 of the bundle. Page 4, which is page 6 of the bundle. And page 5, which is page 7 of the bundle. No inaccuracies. Thank you very much. Okay, well, we have another great delight and privilege being just 2 or 3 miles away from one of the best teaching universities, or the best universities in the world, research and teaching. And we draw on their expertise very often, and it's kindly given, enthusiastically given. So it's a wonderful relationship. They have a wonderful partnership with the university. And as members of this panel will know, we are soon to consider our biodiversity strategy. And in preparation for that, we've got Professor Andrew Lovett of UEA. I'm going to ask Andrew to give a very short biopic, I don't know, a short summary just to let you know a little bit about his background. But he's going to talk about natural capital evidence and look at the Norfolk and Suffolk situation. So I'm going to pass you over now to Andrew, who will say a little bit more about himself. Andrew also has control of the screen and will present slides. Thank you.
Okay.
Andrew.
Thank you very much, Chair. So a little bit of introduction. So I'm a Norwich lad. I was born in Sproston. My family still live in Old Catton. I grew up in Old Catton. I went to school in Thorpe Grammar, as was a long time ago. I then went to university in Wales. I worked at the university in Lancaster, and I've been back working at UEA since 1990. So I've been working at UEA now for nearly 30 years. I'm a geographer by background. I'm based in the School of Environmental Sciences. I work a lot on the use of computer tools, something called Geographical Information Systems, GIS for short, which is basically computer systems for the analysis and display of different types of map data, imagery, maps, statistical information, and so forth. And I work on a range of different projects. One of the projects that I've been working on in the last 18 months now is a piece of work with county councils and a whole range of other organisations around Norfolk and Suffolk. And that's now the first phase of that is now finished. So I'm going to talk about that and where we've got to and what some of the plans are to do next. So I'll now try and share the screen. Hopefully this is going to work. So can you see now a slide, I hope, that says Natural Capital Evidence Compendium for Norfolk and Suffolk?
Yes.
Yeah?
It's on my screen, yeah.
Okay, good. So the piece of work I'm going to talk about started from a meeting in Duke Street, actually. It was a meeting held there to discuss the Norfolk rural strategy. And one of the items that ended up being discussed, because this was in 2018, the end of the year, was the idea of trying to create a local 25-year environment plan for Norfolk and Suffolk that would parallel the national 25-year environment plan that the government had published earlier in the year. And the particular sort of feeling was that if the counties were going to do something like that, working with a whole range of different stakeholders, one of the first things that needed to be done was to compile an evidence base that would bring together as much available information as possible to provide a baseline, to compare Norfolk and Suffolk and areas within it to the rest of England, and start to try and identify the sorts of things that needed to be thought about as priorities and could potentially be included in a 25-year environment plan. So this is the piece of work that we have been doing, which we've now finished and which is publicly available. It's been sort of commissioned by the two county councils, but a lot of other organisations have been involved, including the New Anglia LEP, the Broads Authority, the different areas of outstanding natural beauty on the coasts of Norfolk and Suffolk, the wildlife trusts, the National Farmers Union, lots of other organisations. So the task was to try and provide a compendium evidence, and it's ended up being a very large document. It's about 90 pages long. It's all hyperlinked, so hopefully it's quite accessible. I can't discuss it all this morning, but I want to try and give you a flavour of what it contains so you can get a sense of the contents. So this diagram here gives you a sense of the overall structure. So there's a few pages of introduction about what the project is, the different types of natural assets and so forth that we're considering, and definitions of some terms. There's some information on the regional context in terms of economic, social, and environmental change. And then the heart of the document is the section where it says natural asset inventory. And what we've done there is we've identified 6 main categories of asset. You can see them labeled across the top row there: land, soil and subsurface, habitats and species, fresh water, coast and marine, and atmosphere. And then under those, a whole series of different topics. And what we've done is that for each of those topics, we've basically produced a page of information with maps, charts, photos, little bits of text describing what's known about the status of those assets across the 2 counties, how they vary both within the 2 counties and how they compare with England, and what their current sorts of characteristics are. And you can see straight away that the content there is really broad. We're trying to cover things both on land, fresh water, the coast, and the atmosphere. But there's a big range of material there. It's been quite a challenge trying to bring together material on all those different topics. So that sort of says, well, what's the state of things now? Then we wanted to think about, okay, well, what are the risks and pressures on those assets, and how might that change in the future? So we have a review of each of those. And then lastly, we have a set of implications on different sorts of issues. So as I say, I can't discuss everything this morning, although I'm very willing to try and answer questions. But I'd like to now sort of give you a flavour of what some of the individual sort of pages look like and the kind of information that we've compiled. And then particularly, I'll say a little bit more about some of the key things that we identified in the final implications section. So this is what one example page looks like. This is one of the pages about the kind of regional setting, looking particularly at changing climate information. So we have information along the top in terms of the different sections of the evidence compendium. So it's very easy to just move from one section to another. And then a similar sort of banner along the bottom where you can move between the different sections of the asset inventory. And for today, I've sort of concentrated particularly on information on things to do with climate and so forth. So this is how we've tried to summarize some of the information on climate. So we've used information from the Met Office website, and we've looked at observed changes in climate over recent decades. So those sets of maps that you can see towards the sort of top right-hand side of the slide, those show changes in summer and winter temperatures on a 30-year timescale. 30 years is typically the sort of timescale that climate scientists use to look at change. So the averages for 1961 to 90, and then the averages for 1981 to 2010. The color schemes are the same on the both maps. So the amount of change you can see is an indication of the amount of change that there's been in just baseline observed temperatures over that period of time. So in particular, we've had, a noticeable extent of, say, warming in winters. So that's sort of temperature information. We've done the same kinds of things for precipitation based on observed data, and then a summary of the sorts of projections that are being made for the future in terms of what they mean, the kinds of uncertainties around them. And for coastal areas in Norfolk and Suffolk, sea level rise is a key issue. So we have a brief summary of information there. I should say that what we've tried to do here is make the presentation, as clear and hopefully as visual as possible. But there's, at the back of this document, there's a lot of references to other information and so forth. So that's one example. If you're looking at things across the county, a key issue is things to do with soil and soil carbon and carbon sequestration. So we've looked at different data sets that would allow us to say how much carbon is being sequestered in different habitats around the county. Where is it particularly high? And what implications does that have? So again, you can see a map of carbon sequestration in soil, summaries of information on soil organic matter, a rather large table that just gives you a sense of, well, just how much carbon is sequestered in different types of habitats. How does it vary if you look at different depths in the soil? You get some quite big differences according to the depths of soil that you look at, particularly in certain types of habitats. But it's a compendium of a lot of information, and we've used the same kind of style for lots of different things. So carbon and soil is one of the sort of themes throughout the compendium. If we're thinking into the future, one of the key challenges Eastern England, Norfolk and Suffolk are going to face is issues to do with water resources. Because we're one of the driest regions of the UK, we have some significant areas of population growth. We have habitats where water supply is very important. We also have agricultural activities that are very important, where irrigation, for example, is a key issue. So we wanted to look at the extent of sort of water supply demand balance now, some of the projections that have been produced about how that might change in the future. And so those two maps on the right-hand side of the slide give you a sense of the kinds of projections that are being made by the water companies for the region, and the challenges that that's going to create over the next few decades in terms of, we need to look at ways of increasing efficiency of water use. We need to think about ways of storing water within the landscape. We need to think about water transfers and all sorts of other technologies. But issues of water supply and demand are really important because they just impinge upon so many aspects of our lives and our environment. And then we can also think about the atmosphere, greenhouse gas emissions. So there's several different data sets that you can use to do that. So we can use government statistics, we can use information from the National Atmospheric Emissions Inventory, and we can map, for example, how carbon emissions by sector have changed across Norfolk and Suffolk in the last sort of 15 years. Basically, they have declined, but over that time, the contribution from the transport sector has declined less than others, so proportionally, it's now more important. And we can look at maps of those distributions for different types of greenhouse gases, methane, nitrous oxide, and carbon dioxide. And if you look at the carbon dioxide map in the top right, not surprisingly, you've got the highest levels of emissions in grid squares around urban centres and along main roads. Interestingly, we're able to get information that not just covers the land area, but goes out to sea. And it really quite interestingly highlights the extent of carbon emissions associated with marine traffic. For instance, coming out of ports like Harwich and Felixstowe, and then basically up and down the North Sea coast and across the North Sea. We don't necessarily see that, but it's very definitely there. And we can then zoom in a little bit and we can look at point sources of major emitters of carbon. So there's data that allows us to do that across Norfolk and Suffolk. So that's what's being done here to sort of plot out where those large emitters are. So they're all sorts of different installations. Some of them are things like the sugar beet processing factories, power stations, recycling plants, so on and so forth. So this is just to give you a sense of the kinds of data that we've tried to compile together. We then wanted to look at the kind of risks to all those assets. And we've done that in two different ways. We've done it through a literature review, reviewing academic papers and reports from different organizations. But we also felt very strongly that, particularly once you get down to the kind of county scale, a lot of the relevant information is really in the heads of relevant people working in different organizations locally. So we wanted to try and make sure that we incorporated that expertise as well. And so we did that by organizing a couple of workshops late last year, where we got groups of people together for several afternoons. And we asked them to discuss what they saw as the key sorts of pressures on natural assets and the sorts of environmental service benefits that they felt were at risk. And you can see the results of those on these word cloud diagrams that we've produced here. So basically, the larger the word or the more prominent it is, the more it was mentioned in the discussion or the more important it was thought to be. And we've done this by separate categories of asset. So if you look across the categories regarding pressures for land, habitat, species, freshwater, and coastal marine, one of the things that stands out very strikingly is how climate change features so strongly across all four of those diagrams. So do issues like urban and population growth. So do issues like sea level rise, water availability, pollution, overfishing in the coastal and marine area, and so on and so forth. So, I was emphasizing things to do with climate and water, and that's because they just underpin so many of these different sorts of issues. And again, if you look at the bottom row in terms of the benefits at risk, we can see that, again, the striking thing is how diverse that is. So it covers things to do with food, flood alleviation, wildlife, clean water, recreation, the aesthetics of our environment, and so on and so forth. So it's very, very wide ranging. So that's what came from the workshop. What we've also tried to do is a literature review, where we've taken all the different assets and we've sought to put them in a kind of traffic light framework. So in the table that you can see here, the columns are the 6 categories of asset. The text in the individual cells is all the individual assets we assessed. And then we've put them into kind of 3 risk and pressure categories: high risk, grow or medium risk, and low or reducing risk. So you can see that a lot of those assets are either in the high risk category already, or the growing or medium one. So that's just to give an overview of where some of the issues are. And then in terms of the implications, excuse me, one of the things that we thought was very important was to try and give a sense of how important and significant Norfolk and Suffolk are on a national scale. One of the reasons for doing this exercise was to provide information for different sorts of organizations within the two counties to bid for money from different national or even European funding schemes. And so one of the things that's quite important is to say, well, okay, just how important are Norfolk and Suffolk on that national scale? So this is what we've tried to summarize on this slide. So Norfolk and Suffolk are about 7% of the land area of England, and very roughly 3% of its population. And we were able to identify 10 assets that we'd looked at where Norfolk and Suffolk had at least 10% of the national area, of the national asset, if you like. And what's really striking about those is just how diverse they are in terms of different sorts of things. So they're, for example, they're things to do with very productive agricultural land or productive forestry that has all sorts of economic implications. They're things to do with different types of habitat, heathland, salt marsh, grazing marsh. They're things in the subsurface to do with peat soils and also to do with groundwater, highly productive aquifers. On the surface, they're to do with chalk rivers, and they're also to do with international conservation designations and marine protected areas. So you can argue that across a whole range of natural assets and things that have all sorts of economic, social, and environmental benefits, Norfolk and Suffolk are very significant on a national scale. They certainly have proportionally more of these assets than, for example, would be expected purely on the basis of their land area or their population. So we've got those assets. The next thing to sort of start to think about is, okay, well, what are the pressures on those, and to what extent do they coincide? So that's what you can start to see summarized on this slide. On the table on the top left-hand side, you can see how those 10 assets fit into our risk framework. So 4 of them are in the high category, 5 are in the medium, and only 1 is in the low. Probably the interesting map is the one on the right-hand side, where what we've done here is we've taken those 10 nationally important assets and we've overlaid them, and then we've counted up how many of those assets occur in different areas, occur in different grid cells effectively. And the thing that's striking there, so potentially the values could go from 0 to 10. Well, actually, very little has more than about 3 or 4. Nothing has more than 5 or 6. One of the key points from that map is just how spread out those nationally important assets are. Only about a quarter of the land area in the two counties has no such asset present. About 2/3 has only 1 or 2, 5% 3 or more. So there are key natural areas like Breckland, the Broads, the coastal areas of outstanding natural beauty. They have more of those assets, but they're a long way from being, the most important areas. And even the parts of the map that you can sort of think of as the white space, they may not actually have a key natural asset present there, but they're still functionally linked to those areas, particularly through, for example, features like river catchments. So those white space areas that you can see, for example, on the eastern side of Norfolk, well, nearly all of those are actually areas that drain into, for example, the Norfolk Broads or the River Waveney, and so on and so forth. And actually, if you're trying to increase the resilience of landscapes, the connectivity of habitats, and so on and so forth, then probably it's actually trying to do things, investing in some of those white space areas that would probably give you the greatest benefits. So that's an interesting thing to think about. So trying to sum all this up, we were asked to try and produce a set of priorities. So that's what you can see on the left-hand side of this table. So we ended up identifying 7 main priorities. So those are described on the left-hand side of the table. To the right of them, we've got a brief summary of the rationale as to why we think they're a priority. And then we've got links to the evidence on other pages of the compendium as to why we think they're important. So if I just briefly summarize those priorities. So they are issues to do with water availability, because that impinges on so many things. They are issues to do with sustainable land management, because that's important, again, for a huge range of things: biodiversity, soil and water quality, food production, access that benefits health and well-being. In the climate change context, we need to think about ways of trying to reduce greenhouse gas emissions. We need to think about ways of trying to supporting and enhancing carbon sequestration. We need to look at ways of trying to increase species richness, abundance, and ecological resilience, trying to increase awareness and improving measures regarding biosecurity, pests and diseases. And we need to try and increase resilience and preparation for increasing likelihood of extreme climate events. So in the Norfolk and Suffolk case, that's particularly things on the coast, could be flooding. Potentially in the future, it could be things to do with droughts and wildfires. So that there are areas of Norfolk and Suffolk that could be very vulnerable in those contexts. So that's also something to think about. So those are the priorities. And what we've then done is we've tried to link those to the national 25-year environment plan, so we can see how we're paralleling the sorts of things that are going on nationally. And we've tried to identify a set of next steps. So the document that I'm presenting parts of you today is finished. It's been made publicly available on websites. I can provide you with a link to a copy of it if you would like. We need to do more to make some of the data that underpins this more widely available. So we're working on how to do that at the moment. And we now need to sort of start to think about, well, what do we do to take this evidence base and start to actually create something that can form a Norfolk and Suffolk 25-year environment plan. So there's a series of initiatives that are being developed now in terms of, well, what are the kind of evidence gaps? Because there are some. What do we do to try and address those data gaps? What do we do to start to gradually develop a community of practice, a community of interest, a stakeholder process to try and develop this plan as an activity? And the intention is to try and do this on a timescale the next 6 months or so that we have something as at least an initial version of a Norfolk and Suffolk 25-year environment plan, hopefully for the middle of next year. That's the intention at the moment. So I'll stop at that point, and I'm very happy to try and answer any questions you've got.
Well, first of all, thank you so much, Andrew. You covered a heck of a lot of area, literally as well as intellectually, geographically, etc. Brilliant, and real good contextualised for what's coming next as far as the City Council is concerned. Now, just to kind of get some discipline, because as you can imagine, there are 6 councillors present, each representing a constituency of approximately 10,000 people, hundreds of questions. So I'm going to say to those councillors, discipline yourself and ask one question. And I think because it's a Zoom thing, I'm just going to go through you in order and you can ask your question. And that's not to preclude lots and lots of questions. It's simply to discipline the meeting and make it happen. And what I'm going to ask is, yeah, we'll all have lots more questions after that, but we can either gather, send them all to Andrew, or I'm sure Andrew will be happy for us to email separately if you'd rather do that. And what I'm also going to do is, obviously, Andrew's mentioned the link, and I'll ask Andrew if he provides that to Richard, who's already got Richard's email address, I'm sure. If you wouldn't mind, Andrew, then Richard can let the minutes, that can go into the minutes, he can let the Jackie take that, so that we have that for all eternity and can use it. And before I open questions, I've got 2 questions. One is, it's so interesting, and you've made a statement at a particular point in time. Would you consider coming back to us, say, in 12 months' time, with an update, if there is one, and also, you know, listen to what we've got to say, because we'll be that further on in our biodiversity strategy? Is that something you'd consider, Andrew?
I'm very happy to do that. I think that this will move on quite a lot. I think for all sorts of reasons, there is a lot of initiative in this area across a whole range of different organizations. There is a big opportunity to make, you know, some substantial changes. It's not going to happen overnight. But I do think that we will hopefully, you know, we've done something here which we think is good. We think we've done some, I mean, there are similar exercises going on up and down the country, but I think we've done something that's at least as good as any of them and better than many. And I think we have a real opportunity to make Norfolk and Suffolk, you know, a kind of landmark area working on these sorts of issues. So I think that's important. If we're going to do this, it's going to need regular updating. You know, the idea of a 25-year plan is really quite unusual. I'm very happy to come and talk about it in a year's time. I think we'll be talking about it for a long time if it gets going.
Sure. Okay, thank you. So I'm going to go, forgive me, everybody. I'm going to go through you in order that you appear on the membership list and ask you to ask one question, which Andrew will hopefully be able to answer, or at least tell us where to look next. Mike Stannard, have you got I'm sure you have. You've got lots. Would you like to ask Andrew a question?
Yes, yes, I would. On the presentation, of course, Kevin.
Yeah.
So this is an incredibly complex piece of work. That's almost an understatement. And the areas that it covers are, in terms of implementing strategies and solutions, are the responsibility of many, many different agencies, as you've identified. So a piece of work of this complexity is, if it's going to result in coordinated delivery of solutions, so strategic planning and then solutions being delivered, is going to require an equally complex and comprehensive set of, if you like, partnership arrangements or agreements, as you've acknowledged. I can't think of another example of that being achieved anywhere. Apologies for my dog. Shh. No, wait. Sorry. No, wait. In a minute. Sorry. Working from home. I can't think of another example of, and certainly in my experience, of anything so complex in terms of the cross-cutting elements of it, and the number of agencies and bodies that need to be involved. It seems to me, so it's incredibly ambitious. That doesn't mean to say it's not worthy of being done. The fact that it's so ambitious actually means it really doesn't. Is to me an indication of how important it is. But thinking of it from the point of view of one organisation that would be part of that wider network, trying to think about how do we make that happen? How do we ensure that this really is taken on and owned by all those that need to, so that we can align our strategies and our delivery. That seems to me to be, because if we can't do that, it's almost like, well, very interesting, but does that make sense? I'm trying.
Yes, perfectly. No, I think you've identified one of the key challenges of trying to do this. It's very diverse. I mean, I have been involved in meetings with the kind of steering group for this project for over a year now. Those meetings are themselves very interesting, because you've got organizations like the local authorities, the local enterprise partnership, the Wildlife Trust, the National Farmers Union, the water company, all in the same room. Actually, the very process of producing this document in the first place, I assure you, it has not been straightforward at all.
I believe you.
But the very process of producing this document in itself has started those discussions. Okay. And so I don't disagree with you entirely, but I do think there is a willingness to try and look at how these things might be connected. There is a lot more awareness of the climate emergency. There is a lot more awareness of the linked environmental emergency. You cannot separate these things. It doesn't make sense to do so. We're going to have, for better or worse, big changes in our agricultural and environmental policies in the next year. That does certainly give an opportunity to do things differently. There is perhaps a receptibility in certain organizations or certain sectors that wasn't there 5 years ago. And I think there's a bit of an opportunity now to try and make a willingness to try and make that happen. I'm not going to suggest for 1 minute that it's easy. It isn't. But I do think, for example, having an organization like the university to try and provide the research base and support for this, that's another asset, because we have got a very big, strong, multidisciplinary environmental science department that can provide an awful lot of the expertise under these sorts of things. And we also have expertise in running the kind of sort of social processes and engagement processes that you're going to need to get this to work. And we're willing to give it a go.
Thank you. Oh, I'm sure there's many subsidiary questions could follow from that, but I'm asking to wait. Denise, you're next on the list. Would you like to ask a question of Andrew?
Thank you, Andrew. Yes, it's a brilliant piece of work. Thank you very much. I remember some years ago when the East of England Regional Assembly was running, and it covered at that stage 6 counties. The LEP now covers 2. And all the environmental groups across the region, the RSPB, National Trust, the Wildlife Trust, a whole range of bodies met regularly. And we would meet also with bodies like the water authorities, Farmers Union, and so on. And there was a lot of joint working and efforts to try to produce sort of I suppose, the forerunner of the piece of work that you've done now, but it was much more crude, really, because the mapping tools that you're using now weren't available. And of course, all that work really was lost when the East of England Regional Assembly was abolished. The environmental groups didn't meet together. But although that information, that baseline there, which was much cruder, helped to raise awareness, it didn't really so much influence policy. So there seems to be always a divergence between evidence and then policy outputs. So in a sense, you would get policy outputs which were business as usual. And in fact, we've seen a sort of faster pace of loss of natural capital. I suppose, so that's one comment I wanted to make. So I suppose my question is, well, do you think that producing this evidence baseline is going to actually hopefully influence policy, for example, on urban development, on transport planning? My very basic question, I'm going to quickly add it, is the Wildlife East proposal to encourage bodies to set aside 20% of their estate for wildlife. Do you think that's going to, do you think that's really going to help across protecting and enhancing natural capital?
Okay. I'm not sure that I'm able to comment on that specific proposal, but what I will say is that this initiative does seem to be getting a very positive response from some of the big landowners and landowning organizations across our counties, and there is a lot of interest in these sorts of things. So I have been, the last 2 months, I have done a lot of presentations on this, very slightly different to one you've heard today, but similar in lots of ways. So I've presented this to the Norfolk Farming and Wildlife Group. I'm presenting it to the Country Landowners Association early next year. There are big landowning estates that are thinking very, very seriously about these sorts of issues. Yeah. I know of some in Norfolk that are. I can think of others in Suffolk. Everyone recognizes that the farming itself is going through a lot of changes, and a lot of organizations are looking to how they can position themselves for the new measures that will come out of the Environment Bill, the measures that will come out in terms of the government's planned new agri-environmental schemes. One thing I want to do is position landowning organisations in Norfolk and Suffolk to be in a place where they can apply for that kind of funding successfully. But equally, myself and some of my colleagues, we want to provide the evidence base so that if they get the money, they can do the most appropriate things. And that's really, really important. So, I mean, I'm a geographer by background. I can cover a big range. I'm not an expert ecologist. I have got colleagues who are very expert ecologists. I'm actually working with some of them on these biodiversity audits that are now being done for different parts of the county. So there's been one done on the Broads. There's one starting now in North Norfolk. It's the evidence base, and a piece of work in the Brecklands I know of. It's the evidence base from those that will then enable, say, big land estates or organizations like the Wildlife Trust or the RSPB to do their actions most effectively, but very importantly, join them up. Because it's no good having things done on parcels of land. You need things done on landscapes.
Okay, thank you very much, Andrew. Very full answer. Judith, would you like to ask Andrew your question, please?
Yes, thank you very much, Andrew, for the presentation, and congratulations on this unique piece of work. I think as councillors, one of our important roles is to disseminate this work and to give it credence and to make sure that it is embedded as the sort of go-to evidence. As I said, it is unique to have got all these organisations together, and if it is to become the acceptable basis of decision making, we have to sort of, as you say, disseminate it to people and give it credibility, which, you know, no doubt I certainly am convinced by it. But you say out of this will come the opportunity to make some substantial changes, and knowing the number of organisations that you've had to work with, but we probably as city councillors still have concerns about one of our partners, the county council, and how they will use it in their decision making about, for example, how we deal with transport in Norwich.
Yep.
And they've written their local development, their local transport plan. And needless to say, we probably feel it isn't ambitious enough, and it's not going to do the job of actually improving air quality, you know, just taking one example. So it really is fantastic that we've now got this base of evidence, and we should be all signed up to using it for our decision making. And our job as councillors really is to hold to account those organisations that don't use it as the basis of decision making. Have you any sort of help remarks to make on how we do that?
Well, you're quite right to say it's a big challenge, because it is. I don't disagree with that at all. I mean, I think what is happening, there is more information and better information available in digital and map form than was the case even 5 years ago. And that does make a difference. You know, when you can put things like those greenhouse gas emission maps in that form, or I could have done the same with air pollution, PM2 or PM10. Yeah, it's very powerful. Yeah, so that's I think you know, an important thing to think about. You know, so the evidence is important. Yes.
Perhaps something was all to think about then, Andrew, and if you've got any bright ideas. But thank you.
Yeah. Yes,
Laura, I'm sorry.
Thank you.
Yeah, Laura, you're next on the list, and you're in, so that's good news. Would you like to ask a question of Andrew, please?
Well, I did have a couple of questions around influencing and policy making, and how to work across organisations, public sector, private, statutory organisations, and the voluntary sector. But I feel that actually you've covered what I was going to ask in your answers, Andrew. So thank you very much. And thank you for the presentation. It was very informative, and I'm looking forward to using it going forward. Thank you.
Okay.
Thank you, Laura. Jamie, your question, if you'd like to ask Andrew, please go ahead.
Thank you, and thank you, Andrew. That's a very interesting presentation, and I was, you know, especially pleased to see the sort of interlinking aspect of the report. You know, it's showing the ways that the different aspects link up together, and also the focus on water security, which I think is often missed in sort of general discourse. But my question is about baselines, and there's a sort of two aspects to this. One is about shifting baselines. So, you know, I'm of a generation where, you know, I'm used to not seeing an abundance of wildlife, unfortunately. And, you know, when we're measuring wildlife now as the basis for a report of this kind, what the places where wildlife is and what we have now is not necessarily what it would have been 50 or 100 years ago. And so when we're talking about sustainability, it also needs to be talking about restoration and sort of regeneration. So I'd ask sort of your opinion on that and how that's integrated into the report. The other aspect of that baselines is there was a recent Friends of the Earth report in October, I think, which said that parts of Norwich have among the lowest access to green spaces in the country, in Mancroft ward, where I represent. I think part of Councillor Stonard's ward as well, in Catton and in Thorpe Hamlet, whereas other parts of the city have very high access to green space. And so I'm wondering how you sort of integrate that into policy recommendations or into the way that this report is worked out, so that those people who are in deprived areas actually don't lose out because they are not in the areas that have assets, and so they don't get the investment because they're in asset poor areas, if that makes sense.
Yeah, okay, so I'll try and answer the two questions quickly. The first one, I think one of the key elements of trying to develop a 25-year plan, we will need to identify a set of indicators to try and assess progress. So we will need to work with the organisations like the Biodiversity Information Service, the Wildlife Trusts and others, the Broads Authority and so forth. We will need to have a kind of set of indicators, for example, of aspects to do with biodiversity and wildlife. And we will need to set up a better framework for some of them in terms of actually monitoring change, because otherwise we can't tell about progress. We have an awful lot of data at the moment. The problem we have with some of it is that a lot of the species distribution data comes from volunteers. And so you get a rather uneven looking spatial pattern because it depends where the volunteers go. So you need to do something to try and make that information more standard. Okay, so that is very much part, I think, looking at how we set up the kind of monitoring and indicator frameworks, that is very much part of this plan process. The second thing about green infrastructure, you have much more data to allow you to map those kinds of things now than you had even 3 years ago. So I know this because I'm actually doing other work on green infrastructure strategies. I'm actually working with Essex County Council on their green infrastructure strategy. I know what it's possible to do. The piece of work that I've been talking about today, it's big scale. It's 2 counties. But the information exists to start to do these things at a much finer scale within urban areas. I know because I'm doing it for places like Chelmsford at the moment, right? So there is an information resource there now, particularly with mapping that the Ordnance Survey have done, which is available to organisations like the City Council, and assessments that organisations like the Office for National Statistics have done. You would be able to assess these things on a much finer resolution than was possible a few years ago. So that is something that can be addressed.
Thank you, Andrew. That's very good. And well done, Jane, for getting 2 bites of the cherry. Actually, I was just thinking it's a pity Councillor Packer isn't here, because he would have a brilliant example of how we can share green infrastructure across the city. But we'll save that for another time. Just wonderful, and considering the breadth that you've given, and we're trying to get you to drill down, it's just mind-boggling. We thank you for that. I would just make one comment, which is also fantastic. In your not your opening slide, but your first informational slide, you put across the top those kind of the holy trinity of environment, society, and economy, and how the 3 must work together, because if we don't promote all of them, promote one at the expense of the other, then the other 2 will drag it back. just in that respect, a quick question, but you are one arm of it, of that Holy Trinity. So you're one of the deity. At UEA, you've got quite a spread. What kind of work do you do in connection with other departments? I mean, one of the things I'm aware of, Mike about is the good economy that's going on. And so are you talking to your colleagues in other disciplines in other parts of the university so that we can have this coming together with those important elements?
Yes, I think we are, but I would say that we're pretty broad anyway. I mean, my original degree was in human geography. I did a PhD on economic geography. Some of my colleagues would be quite surprised to hear me described as an expert on certain aspects of the environment. What I am good at, I've got a very broad range of interests. Yeah. I do think we span those things. I think that an important thing in our case is that the LEP, the Local Enterprise Partnership, yes, they have got an economic development agenda, but they are interested in these environmental issues, and I would certainly agree very, very strongly about the need to link these things together. That is absolutely fundamental. But I also think that it's when you start to think about it in terms of natural capital assets and the benefits that those provide, because those benefits span the economic, the social, and the environmental. That's what helps build that connectivity.
Wonderful, thank you. So what I'd like to do, Andrew, have you got some kind of closing remarks you might want to say, reflecting on the questions asked? Because here's a chance to say them, and then I'll ask Richard just to say a few words after that about how that might be brought in.
Well, firstly, thank you for the questions. There's some quite challenging questions there, some of which I can't give you a perfect answer to. But one thing that did strike me, you were asking about, issues of, for instance, Norwich City and the county and transport policy. If we are going to address a lot of these challenges, we have to work across administrative boundaries. We have to start thinking about things on landscape type scales. I would like to think that that's something that might, start to try and enable more collaboration across those areas. But just more broadly, you just need a very holistic perspective. I mean, it's not perhaps quite so relevant to Norwich, but I've been very struck in doing this in just how disconnected some things to do with our coast and our marine environment seems to be disconnected from what goes on land. But actually, they're really very strongly connected indeed. So, I think a very important part of this activity is actually just building bridges between all of these different interests and organizations.
Thank you. Thank you. Richard, I wonder if I know I didn't prepare you for this, but have you got a few words that you say while Andrew's still present that reflect our environmental and in particular our biodiversity strategy?
No, I just wanted to really thank Andrew for coming in and speaking to SEEP, and obviously the tool that he's developed with his colleagues will be very useful for our mapping and GIS work going forwards. But I know it's Christmas, and I just wanted to thank him very much for coming in and speaking to all of our members.
Okay, thank you, Richard. So, Andrew, once again, many thanks indeed, and I'm sure we'll be in touch. Members will be in touch, and Rich will be in touch. And as you say, it's perhaps 25 years story, but perhaps you can come back for 25 times then.
I shall be retired by then.
Yes. Okay. Well, thank you
very much.
again.
No,
okay.
Thank you. Okay.
Okay.
Bye-bye.
Bye. Right. So the next part is going to be Richard giving us an update on the carbon footprint. But I'm going to suggest just literally a 5-minute comfort break and resume. So if that's okay, I don't know if there's any switches that you need to make, Jackie or Leonie, or should we just mute ourselves? Okay, so if you don't want people to look at your background, just turn off video. Hello.
Chair, you might like to change your screen around. You're coming out sideways.
Oh gosh, what's happened?
That's better. Thank you.
Right, I was okay before, but oh well, it's doing what it's doing. Is everybody in, Jackie?
Yeah, we're still waiting for Councillor Stonnard.
Right, thank you. So is Graham there?
Graham's there, yes, he's there.
Good.
I am indeed here. Sorry for my late arrival.
Don't worry, Graham, because we did run on a bit. I was hoping, but it was such a fascinating session, the questions and the answers. Very interesting, very good.
I was sorry I missed it, but at least in these days I have the ability to catch up at some point by visiting our YouTube channel.
Yes, that frightens me. It's going to, because it will be like, you know, the old Open University sort of lectures.
Chair,
and people...
Chair, we are streaming live, just to remind you.
Ah, right, thank you. Thank you.
I think Councillor Mike Stonnard is there. He's just in the background. Thank you.
Okay. Right, so I can start again. Okay, welcome back. And if anybody out there, other than Graham Catchingo, is watching, you're very welcome indeed. So we've had a brilliant session for the first part. And as I say, questions, I'm sure Andrew would answer them directly, but I think it would be easier if they were marshalled and sent to Richard so he can put any further questions as one sheet. So please think about that. So now the next issue that we're going to discuss, as it is a panel, and there's a recommend here to note the outcomes, so you won't be making anything rash. Richard, now Claire's name is there, so is this going to be a double act or one followed by the other, or anyway, please, Richard and Claire will give us an update on the carbon footprint.
Thank you, Chair. Okay, Claire and I will do the report. Claire's here to sort of answer any detailed questions on the maths that sits behind it. So this is for the period of April the 1st, 2019 to March the 31st, 2020. And over that period, a reduction of 2.5% in the council's carbon footprint was achieved. So this takes the council to 62.1% against our 2007 baseline. Graph 1 below shows the annual reduction in net emissions in kilograms of CO2 or equivalent against a percentage reduction in carbon emissions over time. And you can see the line increasing up to the 62.1%. So we measure our emissions in accordance to the guidance that comes from government, and using this tool we can build together a range of emission sources which are covered in scope 1, scope 2 and scope 3, and together we calculate the fall in emissions over time. So this year we've achieved a 266.4 tons of CO2 reduction. So I'm going to move over to some further detail, which will be in a chart that you can see called Table 1. And in Table 1, you can see that we've given as much information as we possibly can on all the different sources. So you've got the kilowatts of energy that the council uses in terms of its gas and electricity, alongside other figures that come through some statistical analysis. So we've got a rolling average of different scopes and how they are reacting over a period of 5 years. So in terms of commentary, I'll start on 5. Some of the most notable changes are an increase in contractors' energy use, both gas and electricity, and Claire's rechecked with them, and they've come back to confirm that this is probably due to more robust and better accuracy in their reporting methods. There's also been a drop in contractor fuel use, and again, through checking with them, some contractors have come back and just saying that they're just getting more efficient in regards to how they, travel around doing council work. And in addition to that, some improvements in the vehicles that they're using has resulted in less fuel use. If we go to 7, there's been a decrease 7.2% in gas on our council assets, and this is through a wide-ranging programme of upgrades and retrofitting that the council's been undertaking since 2007. Obviously, we'll continue to work with our asset management team to identify new opportunities, especially if we can use our Salix rolling fund or any other external finances that are available to the council. If we look at 8, this is the first time that the council has adopted using a carbon offsetting methodology, and the reason for adopting this is twofold. The first is that we've been running a carbon management plan now for 12 years, and it's becoming more increasingly difficult to keep saving carbon year on year at a pace. And second of all, we've got a new target now of 2030 in recognition of the global climate emergency. So in order to achieve 2030 and reflecting on work to date and the time it's taken to get to where we are, we have to be sort of mindful that some of the technological challenges that will need to be applied to our asset base will take maybe some time, and therefore the appropriate use of an offsetting tool is obviously a valid way to do that. So if we look at 11, we've used a certified tool to offset 21 tons of CO2 equivalent. This scheme, which is certified again, supports UK tree planting in the east of England, and will also create habitats for wildlife. So that links to the presentation that we've just had, sequestering emissions at the same time. So Claire's kindly given us a graph in graph 2, which shows the path to date and our new target of 2030. And she's done that in net emissions and gross, and green line, hopefully you've got it in colour, shows us achieving our 2030 target, and then the red line shows the council's gross emissions journey. That's without the green tariff and without carbon offsetting. So there's a good range of information here that sort of, openly shows our footprint and how it's progressing over time. The black line shows net carbon emissions, and again, using previous data, a trend line has been used to suggest that what we'd be able to achieve. However, again, I'd like to add that we've obviously been running our carbon management program since 2007, so it might not be as easy to continue the trend that we've achieved to date going forwards. Finally, sorry, just need to turn the page. on 18, we've covered the impact of COVID obviously will have a reflection in next year's emissions. The likelihood is that they will be decreased, mainly for assets that have been not switched off, because a lot of the time the plant can't be switched off, but let's say toned down over a period of time. Also, our contractors, or some of our contractors, weren't able to deliver their duties over several months, and we will expect that to be reflected in the emissions in next year. And on 21, in terms of the council and the work that we're sort of looking to do moving forwards, we have been actively participating in some of the new government external funding from the Decarbonisation Fund to develop further proposals for City Hall and other assets such as the depot. Obviously, these plans need to be developed, and some of the assets that we have are technically challenging to work on. I know City Hall is not the easiest asset to look at in regards to adding renewables, but there's a range of different projects you can see bullet pointed in terms of a flavour of some of the activities that we'll be doing this year and next.
Right. Thank you very much, Richard. In a moment, I'll ask for questions, bearing in mind the report is a snapshot of where we are now and going forward. A couple of things I wanted to ask you, because as you know, I'm slightly sceptical about offsetting. And so I wonder if you might say a little bit more about the auditing of that offsetting, that to make sure that that actually exists, that place where the offsetting is taking place, and that it's suitable to do so. And the other thing I'd like to raise at this point, and it's probably one more for Graham, is to do with you're right to mention the joint ventures and how we're bringing them in, because one of the great things, one of the great benefits, I think, is how we can integrate transport, integrate the fleet, integrate plant, and obviously in the process of bringing it in-house, we can get the most modern, the most environmentally friendly. And that, of course, goes on to the new depot. So I just want to, so that's two questions, one to you about offsetting and the others to Graham about how the new depot might be able to help with the joint venture. Richard, do you want to go first?
Okay, so yes, this is the first time that we've used offsetting. Again, it was about 0.5% of this year's decrease. The reason in doing so is obviously so that we can hit the 2030 target whilst also being mindful of the sort of engineering challenges that lies ahead. You know, in reflection to the joint ventures, maybe now's a difficult time to purchase electric vehicles for refuse collection, for example, but in say 5 to 10 years those might be more readily available. So offsetting helps us to bridge that gap whilst technology catches up to the aspirations that we have. But in terms of the scheme, it's obviously one of the best in the country, and we've started slow with the 21 tonnes, and we will be auditing that once those projects have been delivered. Also, because it's PASS certified, they also match the planting in a separate country in the third world as well. So it's quite an interesting scheme how they deliver not just a UK certified 21 tonnes, but also 21 tonnes to mirror the projects that are happening here in the UK. I'd happily provide some further details on that if needed.
Yeah, okay, thank you very much. And Graham, I wonder if is there any updates or any more information you can give about on the joint venture side?
Yeah, there's certainly a number of things I can say about what we're doing in relation to putting in place measures that will support the new JV to deliver environmentally excellent services. But I think some of this is positioning for the future as much as delivering at day one. Clearly, we're operating within a constrained budgetary environment, and the key things that we absolutely do need to deliver is your sort of a continuity of service coming from April next year, when the first aspect of what ultimately is coming back in house is being set up in the new company. And we're on site at the moment constructing a depot to support that activity that we've been working on for a little while, but we are working at a pace, and we're trying to make sure that we've got the building blocks in place, so it isn't necessarily going to be everything up and running by day one. And certainly I know there's issues of the fleet being carried forward in the existing contract. So for instance, there's no point in having, all the parking bays with electric charging points when electric vehicles aren't going to be in at that point in time. But with this company being back in house and being 100% controlled by the local council, if it is able to work effectively and efficiently, you've got those potentials to drive those forward over time. But I don't want anybody to leave the meeting with the impression that we haven't tried to respond and deliver environmental excellence where we've been able to do it from day one, because there's a number of features that we've been able to incorporate within the new depot that is set up that will help its environmental performance. We actually expanded the site slightly and have put in a maintenance regime, so actually we're really quite proud of the biodiversity benefits that will result from this. We'd like to think it's probably going to be the greenest depot in Norwich, but frankly I can't really demonstrate that because I don't know what the environmental performance is of all the other depots that are around the place. But I would be very surprised if they had the biodiversity benefits that we've been able to build in through quite an extensive planting but also open area theme, because some of the land is a bit damp at the back of the site. So we're putting in measures particularly to encourage amphibians. And there's a hiberniculum being developed as part of that thing to encourage newts to dwell in the area. There's various, we had a ecological survey of the site and the wider area to design the package of measures that came in, and that's informed the nature of hedge planting and tree planting that's going on. And it's not all just designed to shield it. There's a mixture of different species have been designed to support bird, bat life in the area, and also what goes on the ground. So there's a mixture of fruit trees that have been planted, so they will drop fruit at various points in the year, and that will support the sort of biodiverse environment on the ground in the open areas to the rear of the depot. There's also various bird boxes that have been built on the depot, and bat boxes have been erected as part of the site. And needless to say, what we've also done is put in decent welfare facilities. So when it comes to things like cycle parking, we've there was no cycle parking provision previously at the depot. I can't remember the precise number, but we've put in generous provision, and obviously there's already welfare facilities. Welfare facilities will be provided within the depot. They need them anyway, but they can dovetail. So if people are cycling into work, for instance, they've got the shower facilities. So and the location of the depot is quite well linked into the cycle network, because it's where you come out of the estate at the rear of the airport industrial estate. So it really is quite accessible from a variety of modes of transport. So we a couple of other things just to mention about the depot. We are putting in advanced LED lighting, so its energy requirements as an operational thing should reduce. And the thing we are working on at the moment, but isn't going to be in place for the 1st of April, is whether we can put a solar PV arrangement on the roof and associated battery storage with some flexibility to be able to upsize that if depending on what the electrical demand is from the services that are operated from there, particularly in terms of the future fleet and its potential electrification. So that would be the big cause for demand. But until it's all up and running, it's quite hard to specify the exact size of the array that you need in the battery storage facilities. And we're also working to a tight deadline, so we weren't able to deliver that for its April opening, but are working up the plans as we speak. So we hope to be able to take that forward relatively early in the next financial year.
Lovely. Oh, that's great. So I think what I will do for, people want to ask questions is what I did in the first half, because that will sort of control things a bit better. So Mike, have you got a question for Richard and Claire on the carbon footprint? But I can't see you.
Can't you see me? Oh, I can see you.
Now. There you are.
I'm unmuting. Well, just interested in how the progress we're making in this cycle compares with progress made in previous cycles. Is that progress slowing because it gets more difficult as time goes on? And how do we manage to maintain the pace of delivery?
I mean,
Richard?
yes, it is getting more difficult. We had some early wins, especially when the council moved over to a certified renewable energy tariff. Obviously, that made a big difference. It's going to be more challenging, and that's why, again, the use of offsetting will be a useful tool as we move forwards. Obviously, there's new technology coming at a pace, battery storage, hydrogen. Hopefully, these will be developed and will be useful on our portfolio of assets, some of which are incredibly rare and appropriately managed if we're going to use these new technologies moving forward. So yes, we're progressing at the same pace. It's just whether or not that pace will be achieved, or whether or not there'll be a blend of offsetting to achieve it. I think that's going to be determined after next year's results, which will be heavily influenced through the COVID-19 pandemic we've had.
Okay, thank you very much. Denise, you've got a question for Richard and Claire?
Yes, thank you. Thank you very much, Richard and Claire, for your work. Yes, just to add, I've also got concerns about offsetting, because that's really, I can see lots of bodies are going to be using offsetting in the north and the global south as a way of a get out of jail card, really. But anyway, this year it's just a very small percentage. Also, the contractors' vehicles, I'm a bit surprised, but I read that local authorities around the country, which are equally cash-strapped, are using electric vehicles, HGVs even, or hydrogen, and wonder why we can't do it in Norwich, and wonder if we've got a route map for converting the fleet, the future fleet, which bringing services back in-house, transforming the fleet to electric over the next 10 years. And just a quick question, item 7, paragraph 7, the council is improving boiler houses of sheltered housing schemes, which is a good thing, but are there plans to improve the fabric of the buildings, please? And so yeah, some biodiversity improvements at the new depot. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, thank you. So you've asked 3 questions there. I wonder if it's a way you can round them all together, Richard, quite quickly, because I'm just aware of time in this respect. Richard.
Yeah, building fabric is improved as and when on our sheltered housing schemes, and obviously we look again for different ways of heating those assets apart from gas. I know we're investigating river source as well at the moment. So a good range of renewables going into the estate, hopefully. In terms of electrification, I know we have cycles in which we into cabinet in terms of the cycle. There'll be further chance to incorporate electrification as the technology develops.
Right. Whoops. Thank you. I'm trying to think who's next on the list. There we go.
Chair Councillor Lubbock is next.
Yes, Judith, thank you.
Yes,
thank you, Jackie.
I'd like to say well done to Richard and Claire for all your hard work since 2007, and do acknowledge that it is getting harder and harder. But good news from Graham and what's being done at the depot, and I dare say there will be a press release to show that the City Council is leading by example on when it develops a site, what all the things that can be done to make it have the right sort of biodiversity. So yeah, no questions. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Jude. Laura, have you a question for Richard and Claire?
Yes, I'm back. Sorry, I'm having internet connections today, and I hope it improves because I've got 4 other meetings. So, okay, my question was around, well, and I've just drawn all over it, point 17, where we say we will continue to work with our contractors to encourage them to reduce the carbon emissions they produce whilst carrying out work on council contracts. Is that just a gentle encouragement, or are we putting it into our contracts that you will work to achieve X amount?
Richard. Richard?
It depends on the contract. Some have emissions reductions within their contract. Others were pre that on a way that we can hopefully integrate our 2030 target into procurement decisions going forward. So that work is ongoing.
Okay.
Lovely, thank you.
Yeah, so what you're saying is when we started doing it, as new contracts come along, we are building it in. So that's helpful. So Jamie, would you like to ask, I'm going to underline the next word, a question for Richard and Claire.
Thank you, Councillor Maguire. Yes, I was actually going to ask about procurement, so it's good to know that that's already underway. But I suppose my other question, if that's already been asked, is about working with the asset management team to continue to seek out new opportunities to use Salix financing. Is there? I'd just like to understand a bit more about that process. You know, what are the constraints on identifying potential new projects? Is it about the amount of finance that's available? Is it in the asset management team's capacity, or is it, as you mentioned earlier, the technological aspects to certain developments that would prohibit the installation of heat pumps, for example, and sort of to understand a bit of the balance of those constraints across the team?
Hey, Richard, so in relation to our carbon reduction programme, can you answer Jamie's question?
In terms of the finance, things are improving, carbonisation. In terms of time, we have a new post starting at our MPS, working specifically on this role of identification of projects. I suppose our largest hurdle is our asset base. So, you know, for example, City Hall, looking to put renewables even as maybe 10 or 15% of the total energy consumption is incredibly hard due to its constraints. And, you know, we also have the halls, which are, you know, incredibly valuable in terms of their listed heritage. So we have to be very mindful of the difficulties when we're pursuing carbon emissions, not to you know, damage the asset, and sometimes renewables just aren't suitable, unfortunately, at this moment. Hopefully technology will change and improve and miniaturize the equipment, especially for City Hall.
Yeah, that's a good point. I think that this seems to be part of that roadmap. New technologies, you know, it's interesting thinking about when James Wright first asked in council about battery technology several years ago, and we said at the time no, and now battery technology has moved sufficiently on that you started to think about battery technology. So things do come on stream. There's things happen in the future, so that's quite pleasing.
Councillor Maguire, can I just add something to those
Yes.
points? And I think it also picks up a point that I think Councillor Stonard alluded to in his question. I mean, as we look to the future here in our carbon reduction programme, I think there's an exercise that we need to go through to appreciate how we've operated this year, because as Richard mentioned, we would expect that our carbon footprint, for reasons of how we have dealt with COVID, with far greater number of people working from home, online meetings such as the one we are in, how we've been able to deliver our services without the need to physically travel and with far fewer people being in City Hall. Clearly when the pandemic is over and we're able to return to some sense of normality, it's going to be, certainly in the world of work, a slightly different normality to the one that we had. I don't think anybody is aspiring that we go back to how we operated in February this year, effectively. So as we do that, I think actually there's quite a considerable scope for further reducing the environmental footprint of the council and how, in terms of how it delivers its activity. Also, as I'm sure you and all the certainly cabinet members are aware, following the discussions of budget, the City Council has a sort of pressing transformation agenda that it needs to deliver across the council, and in this case, I think we're going to need to reshape many of our services to be able to address the budget challenges that the council has. And in doing that, I think that will also open up quite considerable opportunities to drive forward the agenda for less carbon use through the council and how we actually deliver our services. And I think the third sort of strategic thing, just to put on everybody's radar, is that we're about to embark on the sort of on updating our asset management strategy. And I think this comes back to what Richard was saying about the potential and some of the limitations because of the stock that we own, effectively. Because some of, if you're dealing with very historically sensitive listed buildings, there is clearly a limit to what you can do in terms of improving their fabric to mean that they're far better insulated, and actually, putting in the technologies that mean renewable energy is embedded within those buildings. But I think what the asset management strategy should do is to give us a better idea of what stock we are holding, because for reasons of the transformation agenda that I mentioned earlier, I think the next 7 years will see a program of change in the assets that the council hold that is probably very different to what we've done in the past. Certainly the announcements earlier in the week about confirmation of where we are on the Public Works Loan Board funding will influence that. And I think as we move into that process of producing the asset management strategy, I think the key thing to do is to have regard to the sort of the climate agenda and the need to factor in as you make those decisions about buying, selling, refurbishing assets. That will give you the scope to maximize some of your, minimize your environmental footprint as part of that activity. So there's 3 strategic things that are all coming down the track that we'll need to address, that we need to knit together to ensure that we absolutely drive forward and minimize our environmental footprint going forward.
Right, thank you, Graham. So the future has to be flexible, I guess, and we need to plan for that, which is one of the things about the transformation, isn't it? Right, well, we've been going for nearly 2 hours, and it's nearly Christmas, as Richard pointed out earlier, and I think officers need to get on with other stuff, and members have got constituents that they need to look after. So, yes?
And one thing that I omitted to put on the agenda, you just wanted to have a quick word about future work programme.
Okay. I did. Yeah, sorry, I did. I thought it was going to be on. I mentioned it at the beginning of the meeting, but I'll mention it again at the end. And that is future work. If you've got topics, I know I've said this before, Richard said it to you before, if you've got topics that you think the panel can discuss, remember it's a cross-party panel, we've got the opportunity to really kick things around and think about possibilities and so on, you know, whatever they are, then please email me with those topics and I'll get together at Democratic Services with pertinent officers and we'll feed that into future work. So when you finish this, before you go out and look after your next piece of casework, you might like to consider writing something down. Okay. So I was sort of closing down and going to wish you all a Merry Christmas and a peaceful New Year and a healthy future. So see you all soon enough. Okay. Goodbye.
Bye.